got us moving. It's Young People Nation.
Welcome to Young People Nation. Listen to us weekly as we commit to bring transparency, healing, and truth to the everyday situations in life that might bring you down. Join us for your weekly dose of inspiration. Thank you for listening to Young People Nation. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And now, here's your host, Eugene and Donna Perry.
Let's go. Christ is the foundation. Know his word gon' lead us. Know I'm already going. Taking steps I believe in. Giving guidance to the youth. Giving guidance to the lost. Give the world to the project.
Good afternoon. I am Eugene Perry.
And I'm Donna Perry.
Today's guest is Dr. Rosella Parker Alston, licensed professional counselor, certified professional counselor supervisor, and certified forensic mental health evaluator.
Good morning.
Welcome, Dr. Alston, and thank you so much for coming in with us and sharing your time and your wisdom and your experience. So let's get it.
All right.
Let's talk depression.
Okay.
Yeah, major topic.
Define depression.
Depression is a mental health condition. It takes on various forms and it looks different ways. Depression is a low state, but it can look different from everybody. It's not necessarily the Hollywood version where somebody's in bed crying all day. It could be irritable depression where somebody's just angry for no reason. It seems like no reason at all, and they just in that state. So depression looks different. It depends on the ages, and it depends on what's going on. And depression, when you think about depression is an illness, kind of like somebody with diabetes or high blood pressure. So depression is not just something people get over, you like suck it up, move on. That's not how depression works.
That's fascinating because I remember in my lifetime, as I was growing up, depression didn't even exist. It was just a get up and keep going type of atmosphere. I'm so glad we advanced farther than that now. Is it contagious?
No, depression is not contagious.
Is it hereditary?
Well, it depends. Because if you have a predisposition to depression in your family line, it can be biological. So when you say, is it hereditary, it really depends. Now, just because it runs in a family line does not necessarily mean that a person's going to get it.
Okay.
So if mama has it, doesn't mean daddy's or baby girl is going to have it. It just means that she's predisposed to having it.
Wow.
Wow, that's something. I want to go back to something you said about what do it look like. Is it a difference with young person versus an older person, women versus men? Is in your experience and in your field and your counseling, what have you seen with depression?
Well, depression, especially in children, because children as young as age 5 can have depression and or be diagnosed with depression. With children, they tend to be isolating. You know, the child is once excited about going outside or hanging with friends. All of a sudden, they don't want to do any of that. Or either they may say, I have a stomach ache. And you know there's no medical reason for it, and that is a sign that your child could be dealing with depression.
Oh, wow.
Or they might just be cranky for no reason. Remember I said that sometimes depression doesn't look like a child is always crying. The child could just always be cranky or irritable, and you're like, what is going on? It could be a sign that your child is dealing with depression. The same thing with a middle or adolescent. What could happen is when your child is outgoing, loving to play video games and hanging out with their friends, they might start isolating and just kind of staying in themselves, sleeping all day, or either you might find out they're not sleeping at all. And so you're like, what's happening? Why aren't you sleeping? They're staying up to 2, 3 in the morning, and it's because they can't shut their brains off so they can get some rest. And so that's what it kind of looks like for an adolescent or in addition to isolating, withdrawal, sleeping too much or not sleeping at all, it could be that they're also cranky and irritable. It just depends on the child. The key thing is to know your child. For teenagers, they tend to isolate and withdraw and pull into themselves. And you'll notice that whenever you're having a conversation with them, they're isolated into social media. And that's one of the things, because social media is so big, you can think, oh, my child is just really into social media, but not necessarily. Social media can be a way of escape. And so they're hiding behind social media. That actually, because you have to be very careful with social media, because there are websites out there that tell your children how to commit suicide and your teens, and it tells them the best way to do it. So when it's important to monitor the social media, especially if you think your child might be dealing with depression. Now, for an adult, depression looks different, because for an adult, a person could be irritable, or they could be isolating and not, just all of a sudden they used to be outgoing. Now they barely want to get out of bed. It's like a heaviness on their chest and they can't explain it. They've been to the doctor. They don't know what's going on, or either they are just really irritable and cranky. You're like, you go from 0 to 60 in a second. It's like, how do you do? It's like, hey, how you doing? What do you mean, how am I doing? You're like, whoa. Well, I was just asking a question. And so that's why it's so important to realize depression doesn't look like the stereotypical version that Hollywood sometimes portrays. And now older people, it looks different in the older people. And because with older people, they can isolate. And they will have pain, and especially in adults too, they have this unexplained pain, and you're like, you're on a lot of pain pills, but they're still in pain. And that's actually a form of depression, because the body knows something's going on, so it could be depression.
Oh, wow.
Well, I can think about that in my life. I know one time period in my life, I stayed in bed for 24 hours. And I told my mother, I said, why do you wake me up? And she said, I thought you were just tired. But it was like a terrible sinking feeling. And all the circumstances that was going on during that time period, because, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and we had a lot of racism in their school dealings, and coming up in North Carolina like that, it left me depressed. And now I can really identify with that, where in the other part, I never knew what was going on. And I'm just glad we have come a long way. But
you mentioned something about racial trauma. Racial trauma is also a predisposition to a person dealing with depression as well.
Wow.
All this wisdom coming out. Things we just didn't know about. We didn't even talk about it. You understand? It was like, get over it.
Yes. And
even in the church, you're told to pray about it. I was one of them parents. Till our daughters helped us to recognize, hey, I got a true problem. I love Jesus and he's my savior, but I got something going on in my body and I need help.
Well, I like to use the acronym CPR.
Yes.
Especially in the household of faith, because everything is not a demon. Sometimes it just could be a medical imbalance in the brain. Sometimes it could just be hormonal. Like, for instance, a woman, she could all of a sudden look like she's psychotic. And you're like, what's happening? It could just be something as simple as a UTI, a urinary tract infection. And so when you're looking at depression, I practice CPR. If you can't cast it out, pray it out. It's time to refer it out.
All right now. Love it.
So remember CPR.
Yes. Y'all better write that down. CPR. If you can't cast it out, pray it out, then you need to refer it out. That means go get you some help.
Exactly, because with depression, you wouldn't tell a person with a broken leg to get up and just get over it and walk on it.
That's right.
And so that's the same thing as telling somebody with depression, get up and get over it.
Wow.
I have heard that expression before. Get over it.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's where we've been missing it, I believe, a lot, especially with our young people. It seems to be very, the statistics when it comes to our young people falling into depression, which falls into another topic we'll talk about later, is suicide.
You know, that really falls heavy in the athletic field. Every time you fall down, get up, get over it. You know, you're bleeding, get up, get over it. And I can see that now coming up.
Yeah, in 2017, 2018, there were children between the ages of 8 to 15 will receive medical treatment for mental health disorders. So that lets us know that we're dealing with a real epidemic. It's not something that we could just get over. And another mantra we find out is what happens in this house stays in this house.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And we really have to get away from that as it relates to our children, because it could be a matter of life and death.
Yes, yes.
My God.
Yes, yes. That is true, because I was raised like that too. You don't take the business of the house out in the streets. What goes on in this house stays in this house. But thank God our younger people, like you've been a great mentor to both our daughters, and we're grateful to you because we know they don't talk to everybody. And so thank God for people like yourself that is open to share you, and so that helps them and builds them.
And it's so important to have one of the things we could do as parents and aunts, uncles, cousins, and siblings is to recognize that we don't always have the answers. So it's okay if there's somebody that you trust that your child can go to. Have that avenue. Make that a safe place, because everybody needs a safe place. And that's another thing with depression with women. If a woman is not feeling safe, you'll notice that she becomes argumentative, fussy, and you're like, what is going on? That's because she's not in a safe place. And so she can slip into depression.
Wow.
Well, that really makes me reflect back to things that happened in my own life. And I hope the audience will think about that too, because things like this can't be taken for granted.
And that really touches on our next topic about our young people in reference to depression. We had a conversation with several age groups of females, males. One day we was in Best Buy, and the young lady that assisted us, she just started talking, and she was 17 years old. And she said, when we asked her about depression, she stated that when she talks about things with her parents, she felt pushed aside and not able to express her true emotions. Can you expound on the dangers of that as we as parents, when our children come to us and they're just being truthful, and it may not sound respectful, of course you're not going to let your child just start cussing at you and stuff, but what I'm stating is if they're truly expressing themselves how they feel, and then you just totally disregard that, what's some of the dangers you may have encountered as a licensed counselor?
One of the things when we have parents who kind of push their children aside, a lot of times we, as parents, we raise our children the way we were raised. And so we have to realize that our children are different.
Yes.
They have access to so much more than we did.
Yes.
They have 24/7 access to the world. Because a lot of them have cell phones at early ages, or they have access to the internet at early ages. So we have to be mindful as parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever your role is in the life of a child. If a child is saying, I need help, that means listen. That means stop. And that means pay attention. That doesn't mean still working on the computer while your child is trying to talk to you. Make eye contact with the child. Even especially with the young ones, around the 5 or 6 years old. That's not the time to stand over the child and look down at the child to have the conversation. That means get down on their level. That means even if you have to get on your knees or sit in a chair, make eye contact with the child. So you can not only hear what the child is saying, but you can also observe the nonverbals. If your child is telling you they're hurting and they're not looking you in the eye, that's an indicator. Get help.
Body posture as a parent is major. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. That is something. Get down on their level and not be over them.
Yeah, because it becomes an intimidation factor. And then it's also when you're standing over your child, having that conversation, the height difference is a power difference. And so whatever they're trying to tell you, you're still in a position of power over them. So it's hard to tell somebody you need help and you're hurting when you're looking up at an intimidating factor.
Wow.
That can be the same thing as adults also.
Same thing with adults as well. That's why you'll notice that most counselors have chairs and they try to make a person comfortable when they come into your office. You want them to feel that this is not a power dynamic. This is a mutual respect, because no matter how good a counselor is, it's never going to work unless the client tells you what's on their mind.
Wow.
I can identify with that in the military. You have to be in parade rest or in attention, talking, explaining your case, and the leader will be sitting in a big chair, and very intimidating, and you trying to explain yourself, and you are literally belittled.
And it's important, especially with our African American males, because we tend, as an African American community, tend to raise our boys that, look, you've always got to be on guard. You never can let your guard down at all. And there's one of the reasons because of that, black boys are more likely to have to attempt suicide than Caucasian boys.
Wow.
They're twice as likely.
We talked with a young man in McDonough, Georgia. That's 18, and we asked him about his group and how they view depression. And speaking on predominantly black, he's in a predominantly black high school, and he said they really didn't deal with depression, but I think it was something else there that they do deal with. They may not really know it is depression that they're dealing with.
And that's the key thing. They may not realize what they're dealing with is depression, because actually between around 2015, depression among African American males in the high school age rose 73% compared to other ethnic groups.
Wow.
I think with dealing with that is they're not allowed to express themselves, because it's a sign of weakness. And in this modern day country, weakness isn't tolerated, especially in the black community with African American boys. They're always looked at as being a leader going forth and not having problems. You can take that, you can take this, and just because if I get hit and you can't see my bruise, that doesn't mean I'm hurt.
That's a powerful statement. Just because you can't see the bruise doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And that's not just for our African American males, it's also for our Latina brothers.
Right.
They have the same power, they have the same dynamic with depression as well. And even our Asian community, because depression is seen as a sign of weakness. And so we also have to look broad spectrum and be open to have these kind of conversations.
What do you notice in the Caucasian community in reference to, because it seems like sometimes you see a lot that's happening with depression, but do you have any numbers of that community?
They're less likely. Well, they deal with depression as well. When you look at the studies, most of the studies now are based on the Caucasian community. And so a lot of communities are looking at depression from the statistics that affect the Caucasian community. It's just that now we're starting to realize that depression looks different for other ethnicities.
Okay, okay.
And so when we look at the generic statistics, you think 1 in 12 people dealing with depression. You think generically that depression caused the workplace. And when you say, oh, depression is not my issue, it's not my problem. Well, guess what? It's coming to your door because it cost the workplace over $210 billion. Depression.
Wow.
Is so, yeah, depression is a real issue.
Wow.
I can see society views that quite differently, especially when I was growing up and all. Certain ethnic groups were allowed to express themselves that way if they are hurt or if they needed to cry. But a black man crying, hey, you already been put in a category of a woman. And that's depression all by itself. You had to go by yourself somewhere in the alley and shed some tears. But when you turn that corner, you better have sucked it up.
And that goes with another topic because that carries on to a man in his relationships. And then he end up exploding later.
Wow.
That's it right there. We tell them, say you can't cry, but you know what? They can show anger real well.
Yes, yes. Also, the young ladies, a 13-year-old we talked to, she stated that they really didn't deal with depression, but peer pressure and insecurities, which leads to depression. Correct?
Well, I beg to differ with that because of 4.1 million adolescents between the ages of 12 to 17 had a major depressive episode.
Wow.
And that was as of 2020.
Wow.
Well, what about peer pressure and insecurities? Insecurities, males versus females in our young group. Do young ladies deal with the insecurities greater?
Truthfully, females are going to be 25% more likely to express signs of depression and insecurities, where a male is more like 9% likely to express it.
Okay.
But you know, females have be able to express themselves like that is a great relief. But males have a tendency to lock it away. And that alone will that depressive state. I remember Frederick Douglass said that it's easier to train a child up than to recoup a broken man. And with all that depression, it just breaks down to the point where he just go, as they say, go nuts because of all the pressure. He just cracked in a heartbeat.
Well,
go ahead, ma'am.
No, go ahead.
But that could be that's a whole nother topic. We're going to stay in this lane. That's the problem. That could be a problem, and it helps you get to the root of a person sometimes that you don't know their story.
Exactly.
And so before we become judgmental and harsh and saying, well, suck it up. You shouldn't be doing that. You weren't raised like that. Blah, you just have this whole laundry list, and the person standing there saying, you have no clue.
I remember them talks.
You have no clue of what I have experienced. You just are clueless.
Well, see, that's where it's so important if you decide to go get help for counseling, it's important to make sure that your counselor is aware of your culture.
Okay.
Because, like you said, your story will inform how you behave. And so my story and your story may look totally different. Yes. And it's gonna inform how depression looks in me versus how it looks in you. So having a counselor that's familiar with the cultures, whether it be Caucasian, Black, white, Native American, it's important to make sure that that counselor is aware of the cultural dynamics. So when they're advising you, I'm not treating you as one stereotype, because one size does not fit all when treating depression. So, if you go into a counselor and it doesn't work, find a different one. You're not forced to stay with one particular counselor. Make sure it's somebody who is aware of your story, because your story matters and you need to be heard.
That's a key factor right there. Your story matters.
Yes.
Not to be overlooked by society, not be passed by or on the road as you're driving by, but you count as an individual.
Yes.
That is so important, and I see that a lot. Even people at a certain job I was at, because of where they came from and all, they would just look down as nothing. So they just pass them by, and pretty soon you seen that's the norm. And when it become the norm, that's depression all by itself.
One young lady, she's like 16. I remember us talking with her, and she stated that it was very hidden among her peers, depression. They were able to mask it very well.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because you think peers, we're asking a lot of our teenagers and children. We're asking them to be great in school, be great at athletics, be great all around. But what happens when they're not feeling so great? Wow. And it's not like they could tell their peers, because they're dealing with the same pressures at home. Or either they may be coming up in a home where nobody cares and they're left to fend for themselves. So depression is not something that they're going to talk about amongst each other.
So do you think that leads to cutting themselves?
Cutting, that's a whole different dynamic.
Okay.
But a person cutting themselves, if they're dealing with depression, could be a way of feeling pain. Because they've become so numb that they need to feel something.
Wow. God help us.
That one.
So if you have someone that's cutting, that is an opportunity. That is a prime time to get them help.
Wow. Bullying. That's another topic. Bullying and all. I'm sure every school seems to have it. Boys, girls, adults. The bullying part, one's having the force over another person is on the rise.
Unfortunately, bullying is an issue because it could be cyberbullying, physical bullying, verbal bullying. Kids could be getting bullied over text messages, over social media. But one of the things, a person dealing with bullying, I don't think society realizes that there's a study that's out that says if a person deals with long-term bullying and ends up with depression, that can last that person 40 years.
Wow.
40 years because of a bullying situation. So now you've gone from a child to an adult 40 years.
That is so wow.
So that explains a lot sometimes why a person would take on a relationship and be bullied.
Yes.
Okay. And just stay there because they never got help when they were younger.
Exactly.
But that bullying can lead for adults, because these same bullies turn out to be bosses. They turn out to be supervisors. They turn out to be people in important positions. And it seems like that just creates a nest of advances and also opportunities for them to assert themselves even more. Because you being the boss, it's nobody to tell you no.
Well, that's why we need brave men and women. There used to be a show that asked, what would you do?
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that show.
So, and that brings accountability, especially in the area of depression and bullying, when you know that the long-term ramification means that person could be stuck for 40 years. It's important to just say something. If you see something, say something.
Wow.
Because what we have to do is look at the brain. When you look at the brain and a person is encountering trauma, whether it's bullying or abuse or verbal abuse, physical abuse, whatever kind of abuse, the brain looks at hurt as a spot. So it marks it on the brain. And it says, this is where I was hurt. And so when a person encounters triggers that takes them back down to that same pathway, they're stuck there. So it's like when you see an adult, you're like, why are they still stuck at that place? It's because they have not gone through the counseling process to learn how to do things differently. And that's one of the things when you're a person dealing with depression, counseling is important. It's not enough to just give them prescriptions or treatments. It's important to do the behavioral component when working with a person with depression, because otherwise they're just still going to stay stuck. And it's like, you're like, why are they stuck? It's because they keep doing the same thing. You can't keep doing the same thing expecting different results unless you're trained to do their things differently.
That is so good. That is really good. You just wowed me with that 40 years, being stuck for 40 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that explains, see, that's why you have to have these conversations, because it explains, and that's a whole nother topic, but a person staying in an abusive situation, knowing their story, from there, and they feel, like you say, stuck, and they don't see what they can do no better or no different, so they just stay there and allow that behavior, and then it just festers into other things, which we'll talk about a whole nother time. But wow, you really, that was a wow moment for me. 40 years.
That one study is saying it's 40, the ramification can last 40 years. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been a whole mouthful for this session. Wow. Any closing remarks or any advice you could give parents, spouses, children, because you're dealing with young children, you're dealing with young adults, older adults, and parents. In our closing, is there anything that you would just put out there to watch out for?
I would say one of the things with depression, if you Hollywood does let us know that if you see a person that's starting to give away stuff, precious items, or either they're starting to have that conversation, like they're checking out, pay attention.
Okay.
Because we try to tell people, don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary situation, because trouble does have an expiration date. But if the person you're talking to does not realize that it has an expiration date, that is a good time to pay attention and get them help. Because some people can be in such a black hole so long that they eventually give up and don't know how to come out.
Wow.
And so they want to end it. And we don't want anyone ending their life, because there is a tomorrow.
Yes, yes,
Lord.
yes.
And as adults, parents, families, friends, help them realize there is hope. Because if you give somebody just an inkling of hope, that may make all the difference in the world.
Yes, yes, yes. Wow, this has been so insightful. And what we want to do is leave some numbers for anyone that need assistance. There's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-TALK. Or there's a crisis text line. Text HOME to 741-741. Again, the crisis text line is text HOME to 741-741. The crisis text line provides free 24/7 mental health support via text messages. We just want to thank you so much, Dr. Austin. You are amazing, and thank you for just sharing your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully this broadcast will save one life, and one life matters.
Amen. Well, this is the end of our session. And I hope y'all to come back soon. And this is Young People Nation.